Welcome to the land of mayonnaise and chips, as well as massive ballot papers. Yes, we are in the Netherlands, and I'm joined by Harry Busz to have a little chat about our observation. So how was the observation, Democracy Volunteers, on Wednesday?
So this was Democracy Volunteers' 7th observation of Dutch elections. We've been here over previous years observing water board elections, municipal elections, and general elections as well. And the whole point of our observation here in the Netherlands is to provide feedback and recommendations for the Kiesraad, who are the electoral council, sort of equivalent to the electoral commission in the UK, but also to local municipalities on how we believe the process could be improved in the future, and also to learn more about how elections are conducted in other countries outside of the United Kingdom to help that come into our feedback when we observe in the UK.
Fantastic. And for people who are watching who don't know how the Dutch system actually works, could you give a little bit of an explainer on how it's different to the British system?
Yes, so it's one of the things that we brief all of our observers on before election day. Obviously, the Netherlands has a very different electoral system to that which our observers will be used to from the UK. Those that observe in other elections across Europe will be a little bit more familiar with how this works. But essentially, rather than having first past the post, as we do in the UK, where there's a defined geographical boundary and then the winner takes it all, the whole country acts as a single constituency with 150 members to be elected to the second chamber. And there is a quota or an electoral threshold, which is worked out using something called the De Hond formula. And any party that hits that number of votes gets one seat. So it means that there is a more proportional reflection in Parliament of the actual number of votes that were given.
And that voting process, how does it change for every person? How does it actually change the way that they vote when they're in the polling station?
So in the context of the Netherlands, the main difference that people have is that they will be voting for not just a party, but also a candidate within that party. So in the Netherlands, there's open or semi-open lists, which essentially means that parties put forward a slate of candidates, up to 80 for some parties and up to 50 for others, just depending on how well they did at the previous election. And then voters can either vote for a party or they can vote for a party and a candidate, which essentially means that if one candidate gets a certain threshold of votes, then they can essentially jump up the list and they can be one of the sort of higher people who would get into Parliament as an individual in that party as well. So it changes the voter experience. One of the main things, as you mentioned in your introduction, Joshua, is this means a very, very large ballot paper because there were over 1,000 candidates on polling day, not all standing in every district, but it means that there are lots and lots of candidates to choose from, lots of different political parties. And the main outcome for post-election is that there is always, essentially, in second chamber elections in the Netherlands, a coalition of parties. So something a little bit more similar to what you would expect in a European mainland election compared to a UK election or a US election.
Is the Dutch authority taking any measures to change the ballot papers in any way?
Yes, so one of the biggest changes that's been in for the first time at these general elections, which has also been trialled previously at municipal elections, is that there are 5 different local areas across the Netherlands that were using a smaller version of the ballot paper. So for those who haven't seen a Dutch ballot paper before, I do encourage you to go and have a look online, but they tend to be very, very large, almost too big to handle. And so what the authorities have decided is that it would be more useful to have a smaller ballot paper for the ease of voters, but also for the ease of people who have to count ballot papers. Because at previous elections, you would see that the first hour or 2 hours of counting is literally just unfolding these massive ballot papers. So there were 5 local areas that were trialling for the second time following their trials at the municipal elections last year, these smaller ballot papers. And they work slightly differently in that you vote at the top for a party and then for a candidate underneath, but you just have however many parties are standing in that area. In most areas, this was sort of 20 to 22 different parties, sometimes a few more, and then you would have the numbers 1 to 80 on the bottom, so you would pick a party and then pick a candidate. One of the main things that they're looking for, both at the Kiesraad but also more broadly across election administration in the Netherlands, is how many votes cast with the new ballot paper are going to be invalid because people have filled them in incorrectly. So if, for example, somebody voted for a party which only stood 30 candidates, but they put that party and then the number 32, that would be an invalid ballot. Yeah. And if somebody only voted for a candidate but no party, then that would also be invalid. So at the most recent elections, the municipal elections where this was trialled for the first time, the number of invalid ballots was 0.7% compared to with the old ballot paper, or the one that was still mainly in use this time, but the old ballot paper was 0.17%. So they're looking to see how many fewer, hopefully, invalid ballots will be cast this time, with a lot of voter education in the polling stations with the smaller ballot papers to see if it's something that could be rolled out across the whole country.
Yeah. And proxy voting is an area which Democracy Volunteers, in their previous missions to the Netherlands, has identified as an area which can be taken advantage of. What's Democracy Volunteers' observation of proxy voting in this recent election?
So proxy voting is something which happens in lots of countries. It happens in the UK. People are able to act as a proxy, which essentially means that somebody is casting a vote on behalf of somebody else. And as I mentioned, you can do that in the UK before the election if you apply for that. If somebody's not able to get into a polling station for whatever reason and they don't want to cast a postal vote, then that's something that can happen. The difference in the Netherlands is that it's sort of more of a cultural norm to vote by proxy. So about 10% of all votes cast at second chamber elections are cast via proxy. So somebody else has cast them on behalf of someone. There are two different ways that people can apply for a proxy vote. The first one is more similar to the UK in that you would apply before the election to your local municipality and you would be able to receive a proxy vote in that way. The one that is slightly different and more unique to the Netherlands is that everybody who goes to vote on the day requires a stempas, which is essentially a polling card that's collected when you vote, and you take that in your ID to be able to vote. If you take your own stempas and then up to 2 other stempasses and a copy of that other person's ID, then you can essentially vote as long as they've signed the back of their stempas to say that you can and vote on their behalf. So you could realistically, and you see fairly common, one person casting 3 ballots, their own and for 2 other electors. It's something which is challenging and is brought up by Democracy Volunteers, but also other election observation groups as being challenging because you are essentially removing that person's right to a secret ballot because somebody else is casting that vote on their behalf. And I would hope that if I asked yourself, Joshua, or say my mum to go and cast a ballot on my behalf on the day, that they would do what you wanted them to do. But realistically, that's not always going to be the case. And it is open to slightly more of a risk of people selling off their votes. If you were somebody who wasn't going to vote in the election anyway, one of your family members, you might just give them your stempas and they might be able to go and vote for whoever they want twice. So there are challenges to this. There is a piece of legislation which the Kiesraad and the authorities hope will be in place by the next elections, which reduces the number of proxy votes an elector is allowed to do from 2 to 1. But it is something that is quite culturally ingrained in Dutch elections, and is something which is a slight challenge to electoral integrity because of the secrecy of the ballot.
Yeah. And another area is accessibility to polling stations, which is really important. What was the observation of how accessible these polling stations was for everyone?
Yeah, so accessibility is something that we look at all elections because obviously it's very important that people are allowed to independently go into a polling place, cast their ballot, whether that's because they have a physical disability or whether that's because they're blind or partially sighted or whatever it may be. It's quite different to the UK in the fact that people in the Netherlands can vote at any polling station in their municipality. So it's not unique at all in terms of particularly European elections. But if we do have viewers who are watching from the UK, I know we have lots of people from all around the world, but if you are from the UK, you'll be more used to, I have to vote in this polling station because of the way that we do our registration of voters. In the Netherlands, because you can vote anywhere in your municipality, which range from a few polling stations to hundreds of different polling stations, if you're in a big city, like we're in the Hague Council building at the moment, different polling stations will have different levels of accessibility. the standpoint from Kiesrat and from the ministry is that they want all polling stations to be fully accessible, but certain polling stations will have different pieces of kit. Some will have enhanced accessibility. Maybe they'll have an audio box. Maybe they'll have what we would call a tactile voting device, which in the UK is a very small piece of plastic, but over here is a massive piece of wood with thousands of different Braille candidates on. So accessibility varies quite a lot more. There are obviously certain areas of the country, for example, Amsterdam, where a lot of the buildings are quite difficult to make accessible. But because you're allowed to vote at any of the polling stations, it's something where voters can go online and they can see what accessibility is going to be like at each of the polling stations in their local area. So it's something that we keep track of, and we'll be talking more about in our report, especially looking over time, over the last 7 elections, how accessibility has improved in the Netherlands.
Yes. I'm beginning to wrap up. Can you identify some of the big takeaways from this observation on Wednesday? And where can people find out?
Yeah, absolutely. So we will be releasing our report in 5 to 6 weeks following this election. It's been a really interesting observation for us because we have been focusing specifically on media, social media, legislation, the campaigns, a lot more than we would previously on our deployments. So we're trying to get more of a wholesome overview of the whole electoral cycle. So that report will be out in a few weeks' time. It will be on our website, democracyvolunteers.org. There've been quite a lot of takeaways. I think that one of the main things is that elections in the Netherlands are very well run. It's obviously an advanced democracy. There is a great culture around elections over here. So turnout is normally around 80%, which is something that I think, having observed a lot of UK elections, I mean, I was in Caerphilly last week where turnout was one of the highest it's been, but it was still nowhere near what we've seen over here. So there's a lot of civic engagement from people around elections. There's a lot of staff who work on these elections to make sure that they are as free and fair as they could be. A lot of polling stations having 6 or 7 members of staff who are very well trained, very able to stop some of the issues that we see more commonly in other countries around things like family voting, people being confused in polling stations. And then, obviously, they're also a country which is very open to new trials and to trying to improve their democracy. One of the things that Democracy Volunteers have been talking about for a long time is how a lot of countries that are signatory to the Copenhagen Agreement of 1990 to permit for observation, domestic observation groups and international observation, don't fully live up to those standards. But the Netherlands is one of those countries, similar to the UK, that does. And so
are you going to name drop the ones that don't?
I'm not going to name drop the ones that don't. They know who they are. But it's great to come to a country where the Kiesrat, where the ministry, and where individual municipalities probably know that they're conducting very good elections, but still want to learn to try and improve the experience for voters and improve accessibility and security.
Yeah. Perfect. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for joining me, Harry.
Brilliant.
And thank you for listening. You can see our podcast Observations on Spotify and YouTube. Thank you.